So let's get going. I'm Mike Vesey, Managing Partner of MGV Consulting. You're very welcome. And I'm joined by Julie Allen, who I'll ask to say hello in a minute. Many of you will be adjusting to working at home in these virtual meetings. And although we've got, nearly 50 people on today's call, I want to extend you all a very warm personal welcome. And before I outline what this series is about, why we've conceived this and how today's session is going to run, I'd just like to ask Julie to introduce herself and to make us fully present in the meeting. So Julie, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, I'm Julie Allen. If we haven't met, I travel as a friend with MDV through the Research and Innovation Alliance. And I'm a psychologist and person of eclectic interests, which I aim to bring to these sessions, especially in part 2, which Mike will speak about later. So arriving for today to this space, and if we want to show up to the world and be present in the world, we do need to show up to ourselves first. So all our sessions will start with this moment of remembering that. So please just take a moment to be comfortable in your body right now and just notice it and make sure you're nice and supported in wherever you're sitting. And the most simple way often to just calm our sympathetic nervous system and have us be attentive as well is to attend to our breathing. And so I invite you to just take an in-breath for 4, followed by an out-breath for 8. And we'll do a few rounds of that. I'll just talk it through for you. So in-breath for 4, 3, 4, and out for 8. Okay, try that one again. 4 and out. And one more. And out. And you can keep that rhythm going, or you can return to your normal breathing, and you can come back to that in for 4 and out for 8 anytime you like. And as you're just settling in, just notice just how your jaw doesn't need to be doing any work. You can just feel your lips touching each other. And if you don't need it for talking, the tongue can just rest at the bottom of your mouth rather than be stuck to the top of it. And sometimes it's nice to just put the palm of your hands on your thighs and just become aware of your sense of touch and the skin against your legs there. And all this information is available to us all the time, that sense of touch, the things flowing through our body from the environment. And our breathing is always available to us to help us with that. So it's not about meditating, it's about knowing what's up and being aware so we can be alert and calm, showing up to ourselves so that we can show up for other people. And with that thought in mind, I'll hand back to Mike to outline how the rest of our time is going to run today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for bringing us into the room there. So I'd like to just start, so always start with why, Simon Sinek said. So like many of you, we're probably working in isolation here, and that may be provoking a whole range of mixed feelings and emotions for you, and getting used to different ways of working. Some of you may have children at home, and that's fine. If they're in the background, I'd encourage everyone to stay on mute, and then whoever is in the background can do whatever they need to do. So recognizing that these are very strange times, we wanted to provide a forum for connection, and we also wanted to share with you some tools for personal development while other aspects of your life or work life certainly may be slowing down a little bit. And our second reason for wanting to put on this range of sessions was that at MDV, our purpose is to grow leaders, is to grow people to meet the complexity that's out there before them. And the world has just got a whole lot more complex and ambiguous in the last couple of weeks. So we felt it was incumbent upon us to dial up the range of support we were providing people, to all of you, to lean in and navigate that complexity, uncertainty and ambiguity. So this is the first in a series of tools, habits, practices that we teach our clients in terms of navigating complexity, and we wanted to share that with a wider audience. Each of these sessions is going to follow a similar format. That's going to be 30 minutes of input around using a tool, a habit, or a practice. And then some of you might want to drop off at that point, but you might want to stay on the call and be led by Julie, who you've just met, to lead us through a process of reflection and provocation. I said at the beginning, it might be beneficial to have some Post-it notes to hand during this session. Appreciate some of you may have dashed out the office rather quickly, so a piece of A4 paper folded and torn into 8 will suffice just as well. Anyway, enough of process, and let's get going. So we wanted to start this series of 6 sessions with the Cynefin framework. Why did we want to start with this particular framework? Because we think it's fairly fundamental or central to the idea of how to lead and navigate in times of complexity differs quite markedly from more predictable times. So it seemed really prescient to start with this particular framework. There is the framework. Let's just get it all up there first. Okay, so Cynefin is a Welsh word meaning sense of place or habitat. And Dave Snowden, the author of the framework, is a particular strong Welsh language advocate. Now, in essence, the framework looks at the relationship between cause and effect, how easy it is to see that relationship between cause and effect, or how straightforward it is. So this is a tool to help us clarify our thinking and take an appropriate response. And in times of chaos and complexity, that's why we thought it would be worth sharing this with you. So it is a sense-making framework. It's not a traditional 2x2. And if we just run through some of its properties, you'll see that on the right-hand side, we've got the predictable world, and on the left-hand side, the unpredictable world. And there's 4 domains here in this particular framework. Maybe make some notes as I go through these so that you've got a bit more detail. Now, if I start in the bottom right-hand corner, this is the obvious domain or the simple domain, or Snowden in his latest iteration has called this the clear domain. So cause and effect in this space are recognizable, they're largely shared by all, it's a known understanding. So for example, many of us are now working in a virtual environment and setting up Zoom, issuing guidelines, what to expect when you dial on a call, how to operate the tech. That's kind of stuff that we expect to be fairly simple or obvious. And if it's not simple or obvious, what do we do? Well, we create a checklist, we create some instructions for people. So the obvious space is the world of best practice, of checklists. It's a world of operational efficiency. If we now move up to the top right-hand corner, we've got the complicated space. So in this domain, time and space, the space between cause and effect, is just a little bit further apart. But there's general agreement that if we follow a particular process, use our skills, use our expertise, we will kind of work towards an answer that we could kind of anticipate or see. And I suspect for many of you joining this call, if you're a knowledge worker, you're a professional, this is where you're very much using your skills and expertise, whether that's as a lawyer, a coder, a tech person, a psychologist, or a medic, to work through an issue and arrive at a right answer, right in inverted commas, assuming that there is a right answer to work towards. So this is the world of expertise. It's the world of analysis. it's the world of planning, and it's a world of good practice. And if we get the right experts, usually working on a problem, after a bit of time, they can come up with the right answer. So to continue my analogy of working from home, we might notice that working virtually, as we're doing now, requires a new set of protocols or norms or routine that we need to arrive at. And there's an answer that kind of feels right for most of us. So what happens? Someone who's an expert writes a guide on how to use Zoom, how to use the technology, etc. Someone develops some guidance on virtual meeting etiquette. And if you look on the internet at the moment, there's a whole plethora of guidance around conducting virtual meetings. HR might issue some guidelines about what it means to work from home and what's expected of you. And that is the world of the complicated domain. And perhaps just notice now, as I've explained obvious and complicated, how does it feel to be in either of those two domains? Does it feel natural, comfortable? I'm using my kind of skills. This is what I was trained for. Or maybe it's a bit boring and I wanted something that's a bit more exciting. And if you can think of some examples that you're grappling with right now that are in the complicated space, why not share them, respecting, of course, any confidentiality from your host organization in the chat function. So we can just get a little look at what are the sort of complicated issues that you might be facing right now. And some are coming up already. Excellent. Thank you for those.
We've got rapid workforce deployment, how to roll out electronic signature technology, setting up home scanner, better proficiency at PowerPoint. Know that one. Yeah, a few more coming through.
Yeah, okay. So certainly learning the tech for today, for me, is in the complicated space. When I can use my skills, that feels quite comfortable. When I'm learning something new, sometimes it's a bit more problematic. So sometimes I feel okay, sometimes less so. If we move to the left-hand side of the diagram now, we've got the unpredictable world. Cause and effect here are not known or are not immediately apparent to us. And note all of these lines on the Cynefin framework, they're kind of wavy, they're porous. These are membranes, Snowden asks us to think of them. They're not sort of fixed, rigid walls where never issues might move from one to another. But that shift from right to left is quite a significant one in the framework, because we're moving from the predictable world, a world maybe we've been more familiar with, and we've tipped into the unpredictable world. Now, if we go to the bottom left to begin with, in chaos or the chaotic environment, here we have no sense of what's going on. So one of our colleagues was working at home on Monday when the workmen outside that were cutting the grass inadvertently snipped the internet cable to her house, throwing her husband and her kids into chaos. None of them quite knew why Zoom and all of the tech that they were using had suddenly stopped working. Or in the current environment, this might be dealing with a cyber attack or a scam. And those sorts of people, unfortunately, seem to be preying on us in the current situation. And if you'll notice at the bottom there, we've got this little squiggle between obvious and chaotic. That's designed to represent a cliff edge. And very often something like tech, like dialing into this meeting today, which should have been simple or obvious or clear, sometimes can tip into chaos quite quickly, and without us almost knowing what is really happening. And so it's a cliff edge, and things can fall over. Things that we expect to work like clockwork can fall over quite quickly. Now, this chaotic space can be a space for innovation and novel ideas, so it can have some upsides, but it's usually a sort of space that we don't tip people into just for the sake of doing it. And just notice how you feel somatically about the chaotic space. For some of you, it might feel fun, exciting. For some of you, it might feel scary. And just take a moment perhaps to pause and think, what in your world is chaotic right now? And if you feel able, you could share that in the chat function again. So what are you noticing that you might place in the chaotic function or the chaotic domain right now?
There's a few things coming through, Mike. Shoppers, looking after young kids, and timelines for events.
Right, okay. So some of you are noticing there are some things, what's going on in the wider world, and noticing things that have tipped into chaos. Yeah.
There's some themes around coping with home working and just suddenly having small people running around as well as trying to do the day job.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. If we move now up to the top left, this is the complex space. And in this space, we've got complex causality, which will be one of the topics of a session in the future. Non-linear causality. Things aren't moving in a step-by-step, if this, then this type way. We've often got multiple causes and multiple effects. And because of that, we're not quite sure what is causing what. So as well as scrambling our thinking, that often starts to mean we get disagreements between people. What's the right way of responding to this? There's no agreement on what is the issue, let alone what might be the solution. So to continue my homeworking example, moving all of our staff, all of us to working at home, is that a great opportunity to work in splendid isolation and be more productive and get on with things? But what about those that value and want social interaction and connection? How do we manage productivity or a loss of productivity, control versus empowerment, and trusting people to get on with things? And therefore, in this type of domain, all sorts of pattern bias and assumptions come out because there is no single silver bullet or right answer. And what issues have you got on right now that you are noticing might fall in the complex space? Where is there disagreement in your system, maybe at work or maybe at home? And how does it feel to be in the complex space? Is it challenging and exercising you? Or is it rather frustrating that everyone seems to be running around in different directions? So what issues have you got that you might place in that habit or domain? Let's just pause there. And if you feel like sharing them, go ahead.
So there's a few coming in, Mike. How to make time and organise myself to follow the plan. UK government trying to grapple with how to recompense the self-employed. Frustrating. It feels frustrating, time-consuming, and physically stressful. There's something about the speed with which we can deliver and turn around projects.
Okay, thank you, Mel. And in the middle of this chart, if I bring it up, oops, this is a tech glitch. Can I get disorder in there? Yes, disorder. So disorder in the middle there, this is often when we experience a brand new situation where we're unable, as information is coming in, really to distinguish between the four different elements. So you may have found yourself over the last week trying to distinguish the simple rules or best practice for keeping yourself and others safe from the virus, from COVID-19. You may have struggled to distinguish what are complicated tasks of how do you set yourself up to run your business virtually at a moment's notice and from home. You may have noticed some immediately chaotic situations like panic buying, and are you and your family going to take part and join in, because if we don't, we're going to lose out. Or are you going to hold back and try and be true to some other form of values or operating system? Or are you noticing some things which might fall into the complex domain? How do you balance the needs of family, friends, vulnerable people in your neighborhood, as well as the day job who might be seeking your support? So disorder in the middle can come from the pit of disorder. I'm not sure what is going on at the moment. Or it might come from an elevated perspective of noticing that you've got things actually that are falling into all of these categories potentially at the same time. Now, what do we do with this then in the time that we've got available? So what might be the response that you take, or the leadership response to an issue that you're noticing is any one of these particular categories? If it's in simple or obvious, so you've got a clear sense of what is going on, the suggested response here is to categorize the issues, and then you can respond. Respond through issuing guidelines, establish some constraints, the parameters. This is about establishing a new or efficient best practice. If you notice that you've got some Post-it notes which you've placed in the complicated space, and the experts don't always agree or play nicely, the suggested response here is to sense first, is this the right domain that I'm placing the issue? And then think about, who are the experts? Who is going to do this analysis? An analysis is very rarely done by committee. So who are the critical few people that need to be assigned or deployed to this task? Set them a time frame for reporting back on the response with the answer or solution. If you're noticing you've got items that you've placed in the chaotic function, the suggested response here is to act first. The house is on fire. There is no time to be analyzing. You need to act first and stabilize the situation. And if we just look at how governments have responded to the pandemic, we've seen varying different degrees of action. South Koreans very act first, stabilize the situation. US and UK, not so much. Where I am in Austria, here in the Vorarlberg, the economy really depends on the ski industry, tourism, but the authorities took the decision over a week ago to close all tourist destinations, to put all of those villages into quarantine. I'm in quarantine here, in fact. So they decided to act first. Now, that doesn't need to be a dramatic act of leadership. The other day, I was looking at a Slack channel. I turned my attention away just for a couple of hours. And when I looked back at it, I noticed there were about 5 or 6 people who had fallen into arguing with one another, and chaos had broken out. So I needed to make an act. I needed to intervene to cut the angst and stop the squabbling in that particular Slack channel. If you've got items that are in the complex domain, here the suggestion is to probe first, to scan the environment and to formulate some hypotheses about what might be going on. So you're going to need to ask people here, you're going to need to inquire and suspend your desire for action and to assert your own judgment. So the suggested response here is to tread gently. It's to any of the techniques that you might use from complicated around analyzing, using expertise, planning, searching for the right answer are all inimicable when you're in the complex space. You might get lucky with your solution, but you might equally be way out. So experiment. And when I say experiment, I don't mean with the lives of people. I don't mean with the legal advice you give to a client. I don't mean with your consumer product, the fizzy drink or the chocolate bar that you're serving your customers. None of those would be safe to fail experiments. I'm talking about experimenting with your thinking and how you're relating and how you manage yourself, the processes that you use internally within your system. So inquire, suspend judgment, ask for a range of views, and test multiple hypotheses simultaneously until you start to get some insights about what might be causing what. But you're not betting the farm. So hopefully now you've all got some Post-its which match in many of those areas, and some ideas as to about how you might be tackling them or what you should be doing. If you're noticing that you've got a number of Post-it notes in the simple or obvious space, can you delegate that? Should you be doing this? What guidelines or new rules can someone else create? If you've got Post-it notes which are in the complicated space, are you the appropriate expert? Are you really needed here, or are you playing in this space because it feels kind of safe and comfortable and I can use my expertise here? If you've got something in the chaotic, act now. The first thing you need to do on jumping off this call is to act first and stabilize the situation. And if you've got something that is in the complex space, ask yourself, Are we managing this complex issue according to the rules of complexity, or are we trying to manage it using the old rules from the predictable world? So that's a short introduction to the Cynefin framework. We'll put these slides up on our website, and we've got some activities that you might use with your people internally there. So we've designed the curriculum for these 6 sessions to be a mix of something that is a bit more cerebral or working in the conceptual domain or the business domain. Today's tool is one of those tools. But we've interspersed those with a series of sessions which are more around resilience, and that is likely to be tested in the current environment. So next week's session is around how do you build psychological resilience in difficult times, and we'll explore the power of balance here and how to find or refine your equilibrium and extend the range of situations that you can cope with while still being in a sense of flow. And Karen Ellis, if she's recovered, or one of us, will be leading that session with some practical tips for managing your well-being and inner state and administering some first aid, both to help yourself and others during this difficult time. So that's next week. See you then if you're able to join in. As I said, these resources will be available on our website. Bring a colleague or any friends that you'd like to next week's session. And if you are able to stay on for a further 30 minutes, then join Julie for a digestive and a further provocation and sense-making session.
Mike, hi. I can talk about what I'm going to do next, just in case people are wanting to decide whether to stay or go.
Please do.
So if I say that before we just start, and I think you've got control of the slides there. So thank you for going through those for me. But we're going to have a complementary session that is a bit more, I could put it as, about who and how you want to be in these situations. So Cynefin was looking at the different types of situations you might be facing, and now we'll have a little bit of a pause point and reflection, but a kind of a complementary digestive, if you like, that is to do with settling the meal, looking at it slightly differently, putting it into a different context, and providing some personal reflection and encouragement before we go. So that's what we'll be doing, and it will be about 20 minutes or so for this portion. So as the slide is saying, part 2 is being present, showing up, and we are not alone. That's the encouragement bit at the end. So I hope you'd like to stay for that. So to kick off, just being present, very, very simply, can we just go back to where we started? And that is to remember the benefit of calming our sympathetic nervous system with a lovely in-breath for 4 and an out-breath for 8. And an in-breath for 4. And an out-breath for 8. Just calming and relaxing, being ready to be attentive to different forms of learning. Again, we've been looking at the framework that kind of looks at how you can make sense of things, and this is a bit about I'm partnering that with some noticing about how we might be showing up to the tasks required of us. And I'm going to take a few leaves out of a colleague's book on this one, and his name is Roger Steer. I don't know if you've come across him, but he works in, if you like, the corporate philosophy space. And I'm going to outline 3 flavours of ethics that he distinguishes in line with 3 different philosophical stances. As I describe them, consider which you recognise perhaps, and where you might see it playing out in work or in life at the moment. And after that, we'll look at 10 different virtues that he also gives, and the downsides if they're overplayed, a little bit of the research, and then we'll close with some poetry to look at perhaps one of those 3 ethics. I think you'll spot which one. So looking at that slide, the 3 ethics I'm looking at are of obedience, my way or the highway, reason, be reasonable, and the ethic of care. The my way or the highway one is from some traditional businesses, perhaps, historically, where legal rights and duties maybe have been the most important thing. Sometimes actions can come from fear in that space, and the downside is that we might stop thinking for ourselves. Or if we do think for ourselves, we might be just habitual rule breakers just because we need to be, and maybe dial down our creativity. There's some benefits to ethics of obedience and a number of downsides to it. If we look about an ethic of reason, again, large businesses, some bureaucracies, maybe higher education, actually can show more of this ethic, and rational judgment is the thing that's held to the fore. Sense of prudence and self-control, being a bit measured, and that can work in some ways. But if we feel we need all the information to get the right decision, then we may struggle because it's difficult to achieve that usually. And then the final picture is about the ethic of care. And you can see somebody looking after the world a bit there. And the ethic of care, well, where do you think it happens? I know traditionally maybe smaller organisations, some of them, not always, community organisations sometimes. You might argue family life. And the ethic of care is concerned with our sense of benefit to the most possible, and disbenefit or harm for as few as possible. So if that's our view, then the downside sometimes can be that, well, there are always few, so minorities can get excluded. We may find ourselves in a position where we think the outcome that we think is beneficial is sort of worth all the possible sacrifices. We may be feeling happy and content with things, even if it's not optimal or actually the most suitable thing to be doing if we were getting a bit more objective about it. So ethics of obedience, ethics of reason, ethics of care, do use the chat box if you like to just comment on where you're coming across those, where they're showing up for you in your life, and which one it'd be interesting to know. What I can tell you also is that after the call, you might like to go to moraldna.org, because both these ethics and also the 10 virtues that we're going to be speaking about in a moment, you can hop onto a little questionnaire there and try things out for yourself. So take note of moraldna.org. The next slide shows you these 3 ethics stacked up against respondents to that questionnaire. And this one in particular is comparing work and life and how people respond. And you can see what happens there. With 50 is the median line across the middle there. And there's a difference there between how work shows up and life shows up. You may not make such distinctions, but they tried it for this questionnaire. And you can see that the ethic of obedience got a much bigger chunk in work than it did in life. That ethic of care was nearer 50 and was lower at work. And there's a similar sort of difference, but not so stark, for ethic of reason. And overall, actually, since 2011, when they started collecting this data, all the scores have sort of shifted down a little bit. But the ethic of reason is apparently the one that's shown the most general decrease, which is a curious thing to think about. I don't know the reason for it, so I'll leave you with that thought. I'm going to move on to talk about 10 virtues that Roger adopted, and where do you see or experience these in yourself or elsewhere? And the first 4 you can see there. He's taken from the Greek Stoics, and they were named as prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And he names them as wisdom, fairness, courage, and self-control. Wisdom has got that sense of, mindfulness, if you like, and good sense and caution. And if overplayed, you can end up procrastinating. Fairness is for rights, duties, kind of some sort of impartiality though, some sense of justice, as it says there. If you overdo that one, then you might tip into being quite rigid and callous because you're so determined to be fair. courage, stamina, guts, fortitude, determination. Overplay it, and you might just get in there, stay with the one thing that you're doing, and it turns into stubbornness. And then self-control, patience, self-discipline, and restraint, and all of those sorts of good things. And the flip side, if you just keep going on that, it does become rather self. So you get self-obsessed about what self-control you have and how you're showing up. I'm going to go through 2 other sets that make the 10, and then it would be nice to perhaps see how you think you're experiencing these in life at the moment. So the second set here are taken from the 3, not from the 3 main religions, from the major religious options. Faith, hope and charity would be the Christian version of it, but other ones are available. He uses trust for faith, and that's about loyalty and commitment. And if you overdo it and just go forward in trust, you may be naive, which is to have optimism and cheerfulness. If you overplay that one, you might get a bit of naivety. Love, compassion, kindness, and the downside is the obsession or the infatuation. And the final 3, honesty, humility, and excellence, that he chose simply because they were virtues that had a modern resonance, he felt, and people identify with them. People want the truthfulness and transparency often, but to overplay that, you get what they call, brutal honesty. The humility for modesty and diffidence, you may, on the other hand, become more humble than is good, sort of false modesty, and you can get quite hypocritical. And excellence, quality and merit, and doing the best we can tip into perfectionism and not be helpful to us. I can see in the chat box that a few people are commenting on that already, which is nice to see. The other thing to do is think for ourselves and think, well, okay, with everything that's going on at the moment, and the ethics of obedience or reason or care, what do I want to hold closest to myself? That would be an interesting consideration. And then also, of these 10 virtues, which ones would you like to be embodying and why? So have a think about that. What I can tell you is what it looked like when Roger had a look at how the responses changed on those 10 dimensions or those 10 values according to what hierarchical level in the organization people said they were at. And that's quite interesting if you have a look at it. I don't know if it's the same or different from what you experience. You can see on the left-hand side there is the employee, goes through supervisor, manager, executive and board types of role. And I mean, maybe you want to look at courage, for example. That's the red one. And that starts off with people feeling that they have less courage or ability to enact it. And it does, just keeps going until board level when it's quite high, but not quite as high as if you were in the executive role. If you look at love, which is the one down at the bottom, that sort of grey one, you find it showing up higher in the employee group than it does at the board. Also interesting. Self-control kind of trots along in the middle there for many purposes. But just have a look at those and think to yourself, what am I seeing? You see wisdom there. Actually, people feel that executives seem to do quite well on this one, don't they? They've got a little bump both for courage and for wisdom more than the board. So you kind of think, what's happening that people have maybe actually gone, oh, maybe I didn't know quite as much as I thought I did, or maybe that's not needed. But have a think, which were the ones for you that you would like to enact? Humility, just as a final thought. Can you see that sort of pink line that goes from just under 51 to nearly hitting the bottom, at the bottom right? Yeah, good luck to us with that. I can't see a lot of thoughts coming up on the group chat at the moment. It'd be nice to perhaps see if anybody's got any particular thoughts about what they're looking at there, or even maybe what you think the ones are that are most needed these days. Do we have breakdowns by sex? That's an interesting way of putting the question. Thank you, Jenny. Actually, yes, this might be, and I don't have them with me today. So today just these two charts. If this is something of interest to you, it's certainly something we could consider doing something a bit longer with, and another session that looks at a greater range of these, and including perhaps things about doing the right thing, which is one of Roger's sort of main ways of working with this. So thank you if you're interested in that. Courage, important. People are saying courage and hope, humility. Do courage, hope have to be held in a position of humility and love? Yeah, compared to the case of Corinne. Well, yeah. I hope people have found that thought-provoking. Please do consider, please do keep putting things into the box around those. If there's any other things you want to put in, I'm heading towards the end of this section, and we've had a short journey through obedience, reason and care. Just to let you know, actually, on obedience, reason and care, when you look at those by organisational level overall, care kind of goes along in the middle, and obedience and reason can kind of flip around a bit. So if you wanted more on that, let us know, and we can have a look. Do choose which values and ethics that you think are worthwhile putting out into the world, and I wish you really well with that. And I'm going to close in a spirit of general encouragement while we're being invited to spend time alone as we are, at least physically, at least virtually we can connect. But a lovely poem from David White called Everything is Waiting for You. And it is my habit to read poems twice, so I will do this. It's not a particularly long one. The first time is just so you get the words, and the second time is so you can have some more reflection about it. So I hope you enjoy this. Everything is waiting for you. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence, and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. And the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. Cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness, the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you, and the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything, everything, everything is waiting for you. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for joining this part 2. And I'll hand you back to Mike to close our session for today.
Thank you very much, Julie. And just to echo what some people have said in the chat function there, there's a real power to reading something through twice and getting so much more value and insight from hearing something a second time, and how often in our busy lives are we rushing ahead rather than to do that. As well as these content sessions, Julie and some others from our Research and Innovation Alliance are going to be running some slightly longer provocation sessions. Can't get my teeth back in now. So if you'd like to join those facilitated by Julie and others, please do get in touch with us at info@mdvconsulting.co, and we'll share with you details of how you can join those events.